A very good day to everyone present. I'm Nikita Pinto, a master's student working with Dr. Tarun Chandraidula at the Department of Ocean Engineering, IIT Madras. I'll be talking about work from a recent JASA Express Letter that presented processing methods used to track the long-term vocal changes of a central Indian Ocean whale species, which to this date remains unidentified. The left-hand side map shows the geographical area of the study. Two hydroacoustic triads were used for this work and are shown in red dots, one to the north and the other to the south of the island of Diego Garcia. These triads have been maintained by the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization since 2002. For this work, we used 18 years of hydroacoustic data from a single hydrophone at each of these triads. The hydrophone's flat band response is between a few hertz up to 105 hertz. On the right-hand side is a spectrogram which provides a visual representation of the Diego Garcia call. The spectrogram has time on the x-axis and frequency on the y-axis. The color map determines the intensity of the recorded signal. This particular figure is obtained by averaging spectra from 50 calls recorded over 2002 at both the north and the south hydrophones. The figure shows that the Diego Garcia call comprises a comb of tones between 35 to 45 hertz, followed by a downsweep that goes from 35 to 33 hertz. Together, these two parts of the call last about 10 to 15 seconds. These are followed by a narrowband component at around 20 hertz. The work, however, focused only on the comb and the downsweep, which were more consistently tracked through the data set. The frequencies of the Diego Garcia call, however, changed over an 18-year period, as shown in this slide. The plots shown on the slide are spectral averages taken from the north and south hydrophones. These were generated by averaging 1-minute spectra for each day over the 18-year observation period. Data for the north, however, ended at the end of 2013. The plot shows that the frequencies of the Diego Garcia call, which are highlighted by the black boxes, seem to both increase as well as decrease over 18 years. This peculiar nature of the call, as well as the presence of interference, make it challenging to quantify these frequency changes. Over the next few slides, we will take a detailed look at the changing frequencies, go into the processing methods used to track the changes, and discuss the possible reasons. The Diego Garcia hydrophones regularly record calls from the unidentified whales and from another species, the Omura whales. Omura whale calls have a bandwidth between 70 to 50 hertz and last about 10 to 12 seconds. Time frequency characteristics overlap with those of the Diego Garcia call, and we therefore require detectors that are able to distinguish between these two types of calls. We built these detectors in the following way. For each year, we picked 50 calls spread out over the year from both stations. We then averaged the call spectrograms of these calls to get a yearly average spectrogram. The regions in the spectrogram that went above a fixed threshold, in our case, 100 dB per hertz for the Diego Garcia call and 90 dB per hertz for the Omura call, were then used to estimate the major frequencies of these wave calls. We model the calls as a matrix of sinusoidal tones that represent the major frequencies of the comb and a linear frequency modulation that represents the downsweep. This matrix is referred to as the whale call subspace. This methodology gives us one detector for the Diego Garcia call and another for the Omura whale call for each year. In order to detect the whale calls from the acoustic observations, we used a matched subspace approach that assumes a linear signal plus noise model for the observed data. The whale call is represented by a subspace matrix denoted by H. The amplitudes and phases of the sinusoids in this matrix are, however, unknown and represented by a vector theta. The optimum detector for this linear signal plus noise model, which minimizes the probability of error, is the matched subspace detector. The detector computes a constant false alarm rate statistic T of X using a projection matrix PH. T of X is compared against a threshold, and when it exceeds the threshold, the detector decides that a call is present. T of X effectively measures the ratio of energy of the observation vector X in the call subspace against the energy in an orthogonal noise subspace. The ratio follows an F distribution, whose parameters are given by the subspace dimension. For our purposes, we set a fixed 1% false alarm threshold for the detector. As part of the processing methodology, we also rejected high-intensity interference from nearby shipping, natural events, and electronic noise. We did this by computing mean power across a 15 to 60 hertz frequency band in 5-minute data segments. If the mean power crossed a 90 dB threshold, we excluded the segment from processing. Lower intensity sounds generated by shipping and air gunning last for longer intervals from 20 minutes up to 6 hours. These were identified by comparing the ratio of the average power in a 30 to 45 Hz frequency band across short time segments of 15 seconds to preceding longer time segments, 30 seconds. This ratio was calculated at a 1 second resolution and then averaged over 5-minute data segments. And finally tested against a threshold of 1.15. Segments that crossed this threshold were then included in the processing. Finally, to distinguish between the Omura and Diego Garcia calls, we ran both the calls as subspace detectors in parallel and compared the outputs to make a final decision in case of any clashes. This slide shows the results of running the interference detectors and the subspace detectors over the 18-year data set. Each plot shows the daily number of calls recorded from 2002 to 2019. The gray bars correspond to detections at the north, black bars to detections at the south. The north station detects the Diego Garcia calls between November to the start of Feb, and in some years between May to July. The south station records these calls between June to November. Moving on to how we use the detector outputs to track the call frequency changes. For each year with more than 50 detected calls, we computed the call periodograms in a 30-second window surrounding the call detection instance. We then averaged these periodograms over a day to obtain a daily average call periodogram, shown by the blue line in this figure. We then considered 1 Hz frequency bands and computed the centroid or frequency weighted average for each 1 Hz band. These are shown by red dots. For our application, we then focused only on those centroids which crossed an 85 dB per Hertz threshold. These are shown with black circles in the figure. We averaged the values that seem to cluster around frequencies to finally obtain the estimates of the Diego Garcia call frequencies for a given day. We applied this processing methodology to an 18-year data set to finally obtain the following long-term frequency tracks. In this figure, we see an overlay of the centroids estimated at the north and south hydrophones atop their respective spectrograms. The centroids seem to trace straight lines, most of which have a positive slope going upwards, and one which is shown in white, which goes downwards. The frequencies which correspond to those of the comb tones increase up to a maximum frequency between 40 and 43 Hz, and then disappear. In the years following 2012, there are more lower frequencies than in the preceding years. The comb part of the call has apparently shifted down while giving rise to separate tracks, which subsequently increase in frequency. The track that begins at 35 Hz, shown in white, consistently decreases and corresponds to the downsweep. The downsweep seems to give rise to new branches in 2005, 10, 14, and 17 that all move up in frequency over time and appear parallel to one another with approximately the same slopes. Details of the call frequency changes which were not visible in the raw spectrograms were picked up using the processing methodology. The left-hand side figure plots the north and south call centroids together in order to track the dominant frequencies and fit straight lines across them using linear regression. The right-hand side shows the residuals of this linear regression. The tracks which increase show frequency changes that range from 1 Hz up to 5 Hz, the most prominent of which starts at 34 Hz and increases to 40 Hz over a 13-year observation period. The plots which start later in the observation period correspond to the frequency tracks that branched off and then continued to increase. The track which follows the downsweep goes from 35 Hz down to 28 Hz and remains consistent over the 18-year observation period. We could not fit any seasonal trends to the residuals because of the poor temporal resolution of the call seasons, which render the problem ill-conditioned. Blue whale frequencies have been shown to be decreasing for other whale species in the Indian and Southern Oceans, as shown in this figure that plots the fin whale, Sri Lankan, Australian, and Madagascan pygmy blue whales and Antarctic blue whales. This figure is taken from Leroy et al. 2018. The frequency of the Diego Garcia call downsweep, however, does decrease in keeping with observations reported for the other whales. There are, however, additional changes. These include increasing call frequencies, the disappearance of some frequencies, and the appearance of newer ones. These peculiar observations therefore give rise to questions about the potential causes for these call frequency changes. Prior acoustic studies have shown that cetaceans modulate their call frequencies in response to changing background noise. To investigate a connection between the frequency changes and ambient noise levels, we observed daily average noise values across a 15 to 60 Hertz frequency band from 2002 to 2019. The noise levels at Diego Garcia do not show a uniform trend across all years, but seem to increase up till 2010 and then decrease, followed by a sudden increase in 2015. Frequency tracks, on the other hand, showed a uniform decrease or increase across the years. Even during shorter time periods of high noise levels, observations showed no corresponding change in frequencies. A second type of analysis compared the estimated call frequencies with annual noise levels to check if the whales shift their frequencies out of their preferred 30 to 45 Hertz frequency band into a lower or higher neighboring bands which may be quiet. The figure shows annual 1-minute spectral averages between 15 to 60 Hertz for each year from 2002 to 2019. North Station average are shown in black and the south in gray. The noise estimates showed greater amplitudes at lower frequencies between 15 to 30 Hertz, and the levels seem to decrease at frequencies greater than 45 Hertz. The decrease in frequency in the downsweep frequency therefore may not be in response to the ambient noise levels at the lower frequency band, which seem to be higher. And although the noise levels decrease for the higher frequency bands, the whales increase their frequencies only to fade out before actually reaching this quieter band. Noise thus seems to not be the reason for the change in the call frequencies. Other reasons suggested to explain these changes include genetic changes and increases in whale population sizes in a post-whaling era. We rule out genetic changes as a driver because the 18-year duration considered here is too short in comparison to evolutionary timescales. And while the increase in population sizes may explain the decrease in the downsweep, it does not account for the increase in the rest of the Diego Garcia call frequencies. In light of these hypotheses, and none of them explaining the observations, we finally suggest two other drivers that could be at work. The first is that the increase and decrease are in response to two different pressures. The second is that the whales, in modulating their downsweeps to lower frequencies, involuntarily cause the other frequencies to shift higher, or vice versa. Of course, testing these hypotheses would require identifying the whale and subsequently studying the animal in the field. We are also interested in the existence of a link between the changing call frequencies and migration paths of these animals. As part of this investigation, we are working on providing location estimates for these whales using wideband beamforming methods and realistic n-cross 2D parabolic equation propagation models. Thank you for listening, and I will be happy to take any questions.